We're still in our series called Crushing, Turning Pain into Promise. And you've missed this last weekend. If you missed what we talked about feelings, and I'm going to continue to talk about feelings. But the major overarching theme was found in this verse, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. And I want to read it to you before we get going. It says, "Seeing that we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin." And the biggest takeaway from this last weekend is that God cares about your feelings. God just doesn't take your feelings and just cast them aside and tell you shouldn't have them and tell you they're of no value. In fact, we have a high priest who can sympathize with us. We have a high priest who understands. We have a high priest who went through different seasons and understands in his human nature that he went through when he walked on this earth. He understands. He's not so disconnected that he has no concept of what's going on. He understands, and not only does he understand, he will meet you in your feelings and he'll take you. Now, he won't leave you there, because the thing about feelings is not all feelings are correct. Not all feelings are healthy. But feelings are feelings. And God is willing to meet you right where you're at and help you get to the next stage. He won't just leave you there. And thinking about feelings and this time of year, I think about school, and I think a lot about first day of school. I don't know if you remember some of your first days of school. Maybe for some of you it's been too long, but maybe not. No judgment. But first day of school is intimidating. And especially the first if it's something new, like the first at a new school, or maybe you were in the 9th grade building, now you're in the high school. Like when something's new, it has an extra level of anxiety with it. There's an extra level of fear. That first time when I went to college at ORU, my freshman year, that first semester, that first time when you were first going to class and you were first doing those things, it was a little scary there because there's a lot of unknown. And fear likes to lurk in the unknown. Fear uses the unknown to try to manipulate you and to trick you, because fear can always play to your worst nightmares. Fear can always play to the things inside of you that are the scariest, because no one knows what would freak you out more than you. And so if we can get you into this unknown, then your imagination can take you the rest of the way. You can do a good enough job freaking yourself out. And so I don't know if you remember, I look at my kids and I just look at the difference. Last year was the first year at their school. They were homeschooled up to last year. And last year was their first year at school, new friends, new everything. And they were so concerned. They were nervous. They were excited, but they were also afraid. What if no one likes me? What if the teachers are mean? They had all these thoughts, all these preconceived notions, these what ifs. And for weeks leading up to it, what if this? What if that? What if I come? What? I had a dream and I had no clothes on. And all the fears that you have going into it. And then, the first day of class comes and it's great. And the first week goes by and it's great. And they figure it out and they get in the groove. And, this year being the second year and overall not really having any changes. Lucas is going into 2nd grade and Diego's going into 6th grade. There's not a lot of difference for them. It's pretty much exactly the same as far as just routine and facility and location. And so this year, it was like smooth sailing. It was easy. It was just like, hey, we're here. Yeah, I know where to go. I know what to do. I know these teachers. I know these people. I see my friends. There's no anxiety. There's no fear, because there's not unknown. There's comfort. But I look at the same time, my brother-in-law recently moved here. He's 15, by the way. Phoebe's 20 years older than her little brother, which she's 20 years younger than her mom. So look at that symmetry. And so he had his first day of school here today, and it was at Union High School. He was a lot more worried about his first day than my kids, because he's in a new city, at a new school, which is a really big school. Union's a big school. Union High School was bigger than his whole school district he came from. And so it's a big school, it's a new place, it's lots of kids, he doesn't know anybody, he's trying to find, there's a lot more fear because there's a lot more unknown. He got lost. He didn't know where to go. He took the wrong turn. And it all worked out. It was all good. And at the end of the day, he's like, man, that was a great day. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, because tomorrow's not near as scary, right? Because now I kind of know. And when you have these emotions, we talked about feelings. And I made this account. I said, my wife has all the feelings, and there was a time when she had all the feelings, I didn't. Since then, that's not true, because I cry all the time. But we talk about that feelings, but she promptly reminded me that sometimes we talk about feelings and emotions and happiness and sadness, and that's where we do it. But fear is a feeling. Fear is a feeling. Fear is not like a factual thing. Because we can go through the same thing, and you can be fearful and I cannot be fearful. We can watch the same thing. We can sit through a movie, and maybe if you've never seen it, maybe you can be fearful about it because you don't know how it's going to end. But if I've already seen the movie, I'm not going to be afraid of it, right? Different things will freak you out. They may not freak me out. Different things may make you nervous. They may not make me nervous, and vice versa. Because what we know or what we don't know or what we're comfortable in and different things. But fear is an emotion. Fear is a feeling that people have. And it can come in at different places, and sometimes fear can grip you at the weirdest times. You can be totally good, and then all of a sudden something happens and something triggered, and you are afraid. I don't know if you've ever been in bed, laying at night, maybe you woke up to go to the restroom or get a glass of water, and all of a sudden you have a thought. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but next thing you know, your heart is just gripped with fear, and you cannot sleep for like 4 hours. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. It can be about health, it can be about finance, it can be about your kids, it can be about how they're going to end different movie series that you like. I mean, sometimes it happens, okay? And because you don't know, fear happens, and fear is a feeling. Fear is a feeling. But there's another feeling too that happens. It's also a feeling, and it also gets displayed, and that's anger. Anger is also a feeling. There can be something that we can experience together, and I can be totally calm about it, and it may make you angry. It may make you angry, the result of that thing. Anger is also a feeling. And as opposed to the unknown, which is a lot of times what causes fear, anger a lot of times comes from what you do know and what you expect. That you have something that you know and something that you expect, and that is not met, and therefore the result is anger. You can go to a restaurant, you expect a certain level of service or a certain thing or a certain whatever, and if that is not met, maybe for some of you, it makes you angry. You can have different things. Maybe when you're driving, you expect certain people to drive a certain way. You expect certain people to conduct themselves in a certain way, a certain organized way, and the rules in which we all live with. And some people don't do it, and it makes you angry. They call that road rage. And that is a feeling. I know none of you have that here because you're all good Christian people. None of you have ever yelled, none of you ever honked, none of you have ever done that. But just today, my wife took her brother to school, and Union sent out all these emails, because now I'm getting copied on the Union email, so I know all about it. Like, how to drop off your kid. Here is where you drop off your kid. And they went out of the way. Do not drop off your kid at Asbury. Do not drop off your kid at Mingo. Do not pull into the bus lane and drop your kids off. Do not. And they did every single one. Because parents get there, and for some reason, people think they're the only one who's late. I'm the only one who's late, so I'm going to make an exception to this rule. People were dropping their kids off on the street, in the middle of the street, causing traffic jams. People were getting angry. It was a highly charged environment. Because everyone expected, or a majority of people expected everyone to play by the rules. They had an expectation that was not met. So therefore, anger came. And the result of anger is people doing all sorts of crazy stuff. U-turn where they can't U-turn, all the stuff. Just when you need a fine police officer, not one in sight. Probably they'd already pulled over way too many people because it was chaos. But these two emotions, these two feelings, it's weird because sometimes people react to fear by becoming angry. And sometimes people react to anger by becoming fearful. Like you can have one and it leads to the other. And though there are emotions that can happen, and sometimes they're justified, sometimes they're unjustified, I think there's some times that we can look at these things and we can see what God happens. And I think something from me, maybe you've experienced this. I feel like I've experienced this a lot in like the last week. Maybe it's in preparation for tonight. But like when something breaks, something at your house breaks. Like I had several things break in a row. So my garbage disposal broke. You know when it just starts leaking out the bottom? Like the disposal's just like, I quit. And the water just starts pouring out the bottom, and you're like, oh, that's a neat trick. And you look online, and they're like, well, they don't last forever. That's what they tell you. It's like, cool. All right, well, then that broke. So, I replaced that. And then all of a sudden, my washer won't work. Washer's not going to work. See ya. It kind of works, but we're not going to, spin or rinse or get the water out. Well, do a little research, and it's the lid switch. So I learned how to replace a lid switch. Not a big deal, but hey, it's going, it's good. It's like, okay, great. Then my air conditioner stopped working. Last night when we had that little storm that came out of nowhere that I think was approximately a football size, well, my house lost power. And when my house lost power, my air conditioner quit working. So I got to spend 2 hours working and messing around with my air conditioner, and praise God, it came back on. But when those things happen, where there's not so much my disposal, and then I'll get to that, but the washer, and then my air conditioner, you can react with fear. And here's the thing, when my washer broke, I was kind of afraid. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to pay for a new washer. Like, that's the worst thing to spend money on. I don't want to buy that. Like, I need it. I don't want to buy a new one. That's the worst. I could think of a million things I'd rather buy. Or at least 10 TVs I'd rather have. Right? And so I was afraid. I was like, oh my gosh. And I could even get angry. Like, I knew it had to have been one of the kids that broke it. I don't know how. They don't do their own laundry, but I feel like I could blame them for it. And then when my air conditioner broke, the same thing. Like, oh, this is worse than a washer. Because I absolutely have to have air conditioning. Like, that's one of my non-negotiables with God. But I don't want to pay for it. Like, not a new one. I know how much those things cost. And somehow it always ends up being $3,000, no matter how you split it. They somehow are like, well, it's going to be $3,000 either way. But with the garbage disposal, I wasn't worried. And there's a reason I wasn't worried. I wasn't fearful about it. I wasn't angry. And it's because it had happened before. At my old house, the exact same thing happened. The exact same brand, because there's only apparently one brand of garbage disposals, by the way. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. It's one. And so I knew exactly what it would take. I knew exactly how much it would cost. I knew exactly how to do it. I had already done it. There was no question. I went to the store, I bought it, I knew how to undo the harness. I knew I didn't have to take the harness out because I knew it was already there. I knew how to fit it in. It was easy. It took me 30 minutes. I was never worried about it because there was no fear because there was no unknown. But in the unknown of the other two, it was like, oh, God. And praise God, it ended up being nothing. All that stuff cost me $30 to fix. In the grand scheme of things, that's pretty good. But sometimes it's in the waiting and the unknown is where your faith is tested the most. Your faith towards God is tested the most in the unknown. I think about Abraham and his story. Because it's crazy, because God shows up to Abraham and says, I'm going to make this covenant with you. And goes through and talks about him and calls him, gives him all this stuff, tells him he needs to circumcise himself, which is rough. And he does it. He does all this stuff. Tells him he's going to be the father of many nations. Tells him he has all these promises. Gives him all this stuff. And the truth is, your faith is not tested when God's talking to you. Because when God's talking to you and you hear him, it's pretty easy to just believe what's going on. When God's sharing with you what he's showing up, that's easy. The real test of your faith and your feelings and what you're doing with them is when God's not talking to you. And sometimes we read the Bible and we read from chapter to chapter to chapter and we think, oh man, that nothing happened. But from the time that God spoke to Abraham the first time and the time that God spoke to Abraham the second time, 13 years passed. That's a long time. 13 years is a long time. I want you to try to think about what you felt 2 years ago. Think about a conversation you had that was meaningful 5 years ago. Imagine if you're Abraham and there was 13 years where you had this big event, this big encounter where God showed up, he talked to you, he made this promise, you did all this stuff, you convinced people, you moved your family, you did all these kind of things, and then all of a sudden a year goes by and you don't see the promise, 2 years go by, you don't see the promise, 5 years go by. Not only do you not see the promise, you got no more communication, you got no more anything. A decade goes by, still no kids, still no conversation with God. And then you hit 13 years. And in that 13 years, by the way, Abraham was not perfect. He clearly allowed fear and anger to work in his life. He got angry multiple times. He lied during that period. He tried to make it work on his own. He ended up sleeping with his servant to be able to try to have a kid. He ended up trying to adopt another kid to try to have a kid. And it wasn't until 13 years after he was trying to do everything. And by the way, everything that Abraham did out of fear resulted in pain and discomfort and problems down the road. All the decisions he made in that 13-year period that he made out of fear or anger or trying to rush it or trying to do it on his own, out of his feelings, everything that he did in that period ended up just causing him headaches down the line. And not just him, literally the nation of Israel, which is his direct life, like they literally dealt with that decision for the rest to this day. Legitimately to this day. The issues we have directly come from that decision of what he did, what one guy did out of fear. And after 13 years of him spinning his wheels and walking through and trying to figure it out, all of a sudden God shows back up and talks to him. And it's like, hey, man, yeah, you've blown it. Everything you did was not good. Remember when I told you what I would do and what you would do? But the problem is, it's easy to believe God when he talks to you. It's harder to believe God when it's silent. And it's harder when you don't know how it's going to happen. Because when you don't know and when it's quiet, that's when fear comes. When you don't know the future, when you don't know the process, and it's quiet, that's when fear comes. Usually people, there's people who have like fear of crowded places, but usually you don't get fearful when you're in a group of people. Like, I hope that no one's sitting here like, oh gosh, I'm so scared, anything can happen. But if you've ever been in this place in the middle of the night in the dark, it's a little scary. It makes noises. It makes creaks. Stuff moves and shifts. And you think, man, I don't know about this place. Now, when the lights are on and the people are in it, it's not scary. But when you're the only one here, you don't know. It's dark. It's quiet. And you convince yourself, like, someone snuck in and is living here. And they're going to get me. I don't like that. And you see, when it comes down to God, Abraham had this, and he made all these decisions, all these things, all these concepts, because he thought, I got to figure it out, and I'm fearful. And he acted out of fear. How many times did he say that his wife was his sister? Because he was afraid. Because he was fearful. He did it multiple times. It was also kind of true, which is another story. A whole nother story. But when we realize that these feelings, the fear that he had, the unknown that he had, the fact that God told him to do something that was crazy, because when God called him, he was already old. He was 99 years old. He said, you're going to be a father of many nations. He never had kids. At 99. But something happened when the 13 years passed and he realized, oh my gosh, I've blown it. And he realizes that everything that he had tried and all the decisions he made out of fear and all the things that he allowed anger in, the things that they didn't add up to anything. And he reached out to God, and God showed up to him again and said, nothing that you've done has been with the promise. There's a child of the promise. And he changed his name, and he gave him the identity, and he spoke to it, and he spoke to his wife, and they have this second coming together, the second conversation, the second thing. And all of a sudden, something happened inside of Abraham, and something happened inside of Sarah, and the fear was removed. He met God where he was at, and the fear was removed. And when God spoke to Abraham, something changed inside of him. Something changed inside of him because God planted a seed in Abraham. And Abraham planted that seed in his wife. And when that seed met his wife, it spoke to her body and said that there's new covenant coming. There's something new happening. And she became pregnant. After all that time, after decades of marriage, after decades of trying, she bears the promise because something was transformed in her. And when you fast forward, the amazing thing is, when Jesus refers to himself later in the gospel, he says that I am the seed of Abraham. I am the seed of Abraham. That once you brought God into the situation and said, God, I realize I can't do this on my own. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't need to understand. God says, that's okay. You don't have to understand how it works. You just have to trust me in this process. And he said, I can give you a seed. And he gave Abraham a seed. And that seed was planted, and that seed grew. And we had Isaac. And you fast forward hundreds of years later, and Jesus comes back and says, I'm the seed. Not just meaning I'm the offspring. But I feel like it's a picture of saying I was literally this seed. I was literally this process that God spoke the word, and miracle happened. A barren womb became open. Because when you don't know how the process is going to work, there's fear. The unknown is hard. And our high priest, Jesus, was not immune to this. When Jesus was in the garden, right before the cross, and he was praying, and he was burdened, and he was heavy, he had to pray. He prayed to God, God, if this cup can be taken away from me. I'm not looking forward to this because although I know, I really don't know. There's a fear involved. But Jesus showed us what to do with this, is that if it can't happen, your will be done. If this is the thing I have to walk through, then you walk me through it. If this is the only way to get where you're calling me to, then okay, let's walk through it. That even if I have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That sometimes God has to walk us through in our life the valley of fear. That sometimes in your journey, you will be walked through a valley that's scary. And if in the fear, you decide to allow fear to rule, and you allow your emotions and your feelings to be what makes your decisions, you will make decisions just like Abraham that only cause problems for you in the future. But if you realize that when fear comes, fear never comes from God, that I can press myself into Christ who can say, I know this looks scary, but I'm with you. I can guide you through it. I can take you where you need to go. And yeah, I know it's scary. And I know you don't understand. And I know you look at it and you say, oh man, there's no way out. There's no way to get there. Trust him. In the silence, trust him. In the stillness, trust him. In the quietness, trust him. And that's really easy to say. It's a lot harder to do. I can sit here and tell you, just trust him. But it's a lot harder when you're the one being walked through the valley of fear. It's a lot harder when you're the one looking around saying, there's no way. There's no way out. I can't get out. I'm stuck. David talked about it all the time in the Psalms, that I'm surrounded on all sides. I'm trapped. They're coming for me. They're accusing me. God, I need you. And that's where David always turned it. That in my fear, that's very legitimate. And in the surroundings and the feelings that I'm literally being persecuted, I'm literally being chased. But God, the only thing that can get me out of this is you. And I think when it comes down to our feelings and in our emotions and what we're doing, God's never telling us don't have them. I think the real question he's asking is, what are you doing with them and who are you taking them to? When fear grips your heart, who are you turning to? Are you turning to your own ideas? Are you turning to your own process? Are you going to try to figure it out on your own? Do everything you know to do? Which in the natural sounds good. That's what Abraham did. Well, I'm supposed to have a kid. All I'm going to have a kid is if I can, have a kid, so I'm going to have a kid. Makes sense. But he didn't trust the word that God gave him. He didn't trust the part that God had for him. And so when we get gripped with fear, do we go to God or do we go to ourselves? Because if we go to ourselves with fear, you're not going to have a great result. Because if I go to myself in fear, all I do is freak myself out more. That's it. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I have a fearful thought about the church or about my family or about money or about health, and if I go to myself and say, Jonathan, let's think about, okay, yeah, you're worried about this. Let's go ahead and you come up with a plan of how to get out of it. Then I realize, oh no, it's over. Because if I got to come up with a plan, I'm in trouble. I'm going to have an issue because I'll come up with a plan and then myself will come up with why that plan won't work. And then I'll be like, well, and now I'm just degraded to nothing. And I can go from sleeping in a great place with a great family to just desolate living on the streets with 4 kids. Oh, just in 1 hour of lack of sleep. Well, that's it. Because I did that, everything's gone. My whole life. Because I bought the large popcorn instead of the medium. And that was what did it. Because we can do that to ourselves. My wife said something to me the other day, and I'll never forget. I don't think I'll ever forget this. I can't even, it's funny how fear is really a big deal until you get over it, and then sometimes you can't even remember it. It's like, what had me all wrapped up the other night? So I actually don't remember what the subject was. It was something. Could be money related. Could be family related. I don't remember. But I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just had a thought, and it just gripped me. I remember it just gripped me with fear. Just gripped me with fear. And I sat there for an hour, just wrestling with it, thinking about it, trying to figure it out. And then I decided I was going to just curse it to the pit of hell, and that didn't work. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just struggling with this. I don't know, I'm not doing a very good job. I just spoke on, putting your burdens on Jesus, and here I am just burdening myself in the middle of the night, can't sleep. I thought, man, what am I going to do? So this is not a nice thing, but I woke my wife up. And I said, hey, can you pray for me? I'm just struggling. I'm had this, and I told her whatever it was. Like I said, I can't remember what it was. And can you just pray for me? And she prayed. It wasn't long. She prayed. And she just said, hey, you know what? Your sleep, your rest is a sacrifice to God. When you rest, when you sleep when there's chaos, when you rest when there's fear, when you trust when it doesn't look good, when you lay down your own thoughts whenever he's working, you're laying something down. And that is a sacrifice. And she said, just let your sleep be a sacrifice to God tonight. And all of a sudden it was like, when I rest into him, when I trust him, even when my mind says, oh, you know what, you should get up and you should just completely redo the family budget right now, 3 o'clock in the morning, do it. The reality is me resting and trusting in my good shepherd and taking those feelings to him, saying, God, this is how I feel. This is the fear. This is the anger. This is the stress. This is the chaos. But despite all that, I'm going to go to sleep. And I'm going to rest. And I'm going to give it to you. And I'm going to believe that the God who never sleeps nor slumbers is going to be working on my behalf. I'm going to be the one who leads me past the places that are fearful to get me to the places that are lush and full of provision, I'm going to trust that that person is going to get me there. It doesn't mean that in the journey it's not going to be hard. It doesn't mean that in the ascent it won't be difficult. It doesn't mean that there may be times where I feel like I'm being crushed and that my spirit is at a difficult place. It doesn't mean that it won't be hard. But in those seasons, I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to give my feelings to you. And the beautiful thing is, God meets you right where you're at. Because he understands them. Because we have the high priest who understands. We have the high priest who says, I get it. I get what you're feeling. I understand where you're at. Now let's go where we need to go. Let me show you where we're going. Let me show you the pastures I have for you. Yeah, we got to go through this difficult part, but let me get you to the other side and you'll see it. And the thing I'll close with in this thought, and these have been connected to me, and maybe they'll be connected to you, and maybe they're not. But I get reminded in the different places, whether it's Jeremiah or Isaiah, like Isaiah 64, verse 8, where it says, and yet, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay. You are the potter. We are all formed by your hand. That sometimes we ask God, form us, make me into your vessel, make me into the thing you want me to be. I want my life to be for yours. And yet, clay, until it's been baked, is soft. And sometimes in the forming process, the potter takes what he's doing and just completely smashes it down back to the clay. My first job was a summer job painting houses, but my second job was I was a day camp counselor for Tulsa Parks. And I worked over on 41st and Union on the other side at Reed Park. And Reed Park actually was an interesting park, and I believe they still have it today, but they had a kiln there. And they taught pottery classes there. And you could do different kind of pottery and acrylics and different things. And I got to watch some of the people go in there and use the spinning wheels. And they'll be working, and you'll see something and think, wow, that's looking really good, especially me, because I'm a terrible artist. I'm a terrible person like that. So I'm like, wow, that looks so good. You're thinking, wow, that looks so good. And all of a sudden, you would just see them, and it'd be there, and you think, wow, that looks great. And they would just and smash it back down to where it's just a pile of clay. And you think, oh my gosh, that was really good. But in the artist's mind, in the potter's mind, it wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't what they intended. And unlike other mediums where you just move it and do it, and other things, in clay, it's easier just to start over. It's easier just to smash it down to nothing. And sometimes in our lives where we're crying out for God to form us, and in the process of forming us, sometimes he starts over. And you think, God, we were just getting somewhere. And then all of a sudden I feel like I was smashed back down. He said, because I've got a perfect thing in my mind. I don't know if you know artists or perfectionists. They have a perfect thing in their mind. They have a perfect thing that they picture, and they're working towards it. And when what they're working on doesn't meet it, they'll start over. God has a perfect thing in mind for you. And the thing is, in the forming you, he has an idea. And sometimes the thing that he's forming you to be is maybe not the thing that you had in mind. Which is why Isaiah 29:16 says, how foolish can you be? He is the potter. He is certainly greater than you, the clay. Should the created thing say to the one who made it, he didn't make me? Did the jar ever say to the potter, who made this? Or the potter who made me is stupid? I didn't say it's in the Bible, Isaiah. Clearly he understood human nature. That sometimes we're like, God, form me into your vessel. And they're like, oh, not that vessel. I was thinking something different. 2 handles. What is this? It's not what I asked for. But the thing about clay is it's shapeable, it's moldable, it's restartable until you put it through the fire. And only after you bake it does it become hard and usable, which is not good if you're the clay. Because what that means is you're going to be worked, you're going to be moved, you're going to be smashed, you're going to be shaped, you're going to be formed. And then once you become the form that the potter wants you to be, then you have to go through a baking. And as the clay, it's unknown. The clay doesn't know what's in the potter's mind because the clay is the clay and the potter has the vision. The clay doesn't know what they're going to be until they get to the end. And then they can see it. And that fear of the unknown can creep in. And sometimes I look at my life and I think, how many times was God forming me and working on me, and I was frustrated because he wasn't forming me into the thing that I wanted to be? How arrogant is it of me to tell God the Creator, like, hey, you're doing it wrong. I clearly asked to be this, but you're making me this. But God knows better. God has a plan for you. And we can't allow our fear of the unknown or the anger of uncertainty, the feelings that we have, to overrule what God's doing. And sometimes we need to realize that things have to get a little hot and a little crazy and a little unknown and a little like, I can't stand this anymore, before we get to the part where we're ready for use. That the last step before you're ready for use sometimes is the fire. It's the proving, it's the testing, it's the oven. But on the other side now you have a vessel that's ready to be used. And we literally have clay pots that are 2,500 years old, that are still intact, that are still together, that were formed to the exact specification of the artist, that were baked, that were put through the fire, and yet they still are serving their purpose today. Because the process works well when you trust the potter. So my encouragement for you tonight is, don't allow your fear, your anger, the things that you're walking through, the unknown, the difficulty, don't allow the unknown, don't allow those things to make it where in the process of your shaping and the process of your molding and the process of the baking and the process that you're going through, that you miss that opportunity. Because God will meet you right where you're at. He'll shape you where you're at, and he say, listen, you're here, you're this thing, but I can shape you into something greater. I can shape you into a vessel that's exactly what I want you to be. It's exactly for the purpose that you don't even know you need to be made for. Because I know the plans that I have for you. And you may think you need one thing, but you don't know what I want to fill you with. You don't know the things and the purpose I have for you. You don't know the longevity of the ministry and the opportunity that I have for you. You don't know the people I want you to meet. So I'm making you for the purpose that I have. So if you're here tonight and feelings are maybe out of control, fear is gripping you, anger is there, frustration is hitting you, I just want to pray for everyone tonight. That in these processes, with these emotions, with these feelings, with the things that we're walking through, we can know that Christ is meeting us where we're at. And we can relent the control over our situation and instead give ourselves to the hands of the potter, to the one who has a plan for you, for the one who has a purpose for you, and say, even though I feel this way, I'm going to trust you that you're here with me. I'm going to trust you that you guide me. I'm going to trust you that you take me where I need to go and shape me to where I go and provide for me the way I need to be provided for. And even when it's dark, and even when it's scary, and even when I feel alone, I know I'm not alone. Father God, thank you for tonight. Thank you for your love and your goodness and your mercy. Thank you for what you're doing in our hearts. Thank you for the word that's here today that's alive and well and that's true. And thank you, Father God, that the things that you put in our hearts and the things in our hearts that potentially fear tries to grip, or the things in our heart that anger tries to take care of, or any of the feelings or the emotions that we experience, that you can meet us in those feelings, that you can shape us, that you can guide us, that you can take us and create us to the purpose and the calling that you have for us. We just love you so much. We're thankful for your word. We're thankful for your calling. We're thankful for the truth that you have in us. And I pray for anyone who's here tonight, whose heart is gripped by fear, who's dealing with anger that maybe they can't even express why they're angry, or is dealing with the feeling that what they're being shaped for is maybe not what they wanted to be. Father God, I pray that we would take those feelings, give them to you, and allow you to meet us and take us and shape us to what you're calling us to. It's in your holy name we pray tonight. Amen and amen.